morning, everybody. Welcome to Thy Strong Word. I'm Pastor A.J. Espinosa. We're reading the entire Bible together out loud, chapter by chapter. Here we are, 1 Samuel chapter 26. And yeah, this is kind of one of these deja vu moments, right? Last chapter, fascinating with Abigail. We have a real moment of David needing to be saved from himself. It seems like there's a big turning point with the death of Samuel. And you're thinking, okay, so everything's going to be really different now. And like the next chapter we get, it's like, hang on, what? Didn't we already do this? So yeah, it's David. This is what you have in the ESV, right? David spares Saul again. So is it just kind of the same thing all over again? Are there some important differences this time? Well, there's certainly some different characters involved. It doesn't happen all the same way. So this will be interesting to think about, because I think there are actually some pretty significant differences when you compare the stories. Joining us today, we've got Pastor Lucas Witt, pastor at Immanuel Lutheran Church in Baltimore, Maryland. Good morning. How are you doing, brother?
Good morning, AJ. And actually, over here on the East Coast, it's actually good afternoon, believe it or not. So we're a few years into the future.
I guess it's because it's literally like 5 minutes afternoon, right, over there?
Yeah. So, I know you're just rolling out of bed over there in California, but we're here we're looking for the siesta over here. Yeah.
No, that's right. The siesta, that's right. I've been up since 5, but it's, no, definitely. It's, the siesta would be welcome right around that time. So how are you doing? How's, it feels, mentioning the time difference, just sometimes feels like the East Coast is just a different planet or something.
I can't say I've been on the West Coast too much, but out here it's definitely faster paced, and people out here are trying to get back into step, I'd say. There's lots of discussions on the street about the upcoming election, lots of politics out here. We're not nearly as intense as Washington, D.C., but it definitely comes up more in Baltimore than I was used to in the Midwest around the St. Louis area there. A big thing right now on the streets as well is what are the public schools going to do? Later next week, they're going to talk about are they going to start doing something in the building, some hybrid learning, or is it going to stay online? So some big things happening here in November to make life interesting.
Oh, certainly. And and those same sorts of conversations, I think, are happening over here. A lot of the same thing with a lot of schools actually already having reopened, and some people saying like, whoa, hang on a second. Other schools haven't been opened yet. So, all these things seem to be going on all over the place. A little bit of like a leveling effect, it seems, with just all of us kind of going through this kind of same thing that's just kind of bigger. Looking at a chapter like this, where it's David and Saul, here they are again, the transition of power and who's going to come into power and when, that seems to be central here, right? The last time they saw each other, Saul said that he acknowledged that David would one day become king.
Yeah, there's definitely, like you said, it seemed like we hit a point of a bit of resolution a couple chapters ago, and here we are doing something very similar. And they both have their chess pieces of opportunity and also vulnerability. So it's interesting to see what they decide to do and what guides their thoughts, whether it's their own or God's. And it seems they both have those moments where you can see the impact of the Lord amongst them, and also clearly the impact of their own thoughts and ambitions as well.
I'm looking forward to digging into this. Before we do, though, would you go ahead and start us off with a prayer?
Yeah. Let us pray. Blessed Lord, who caused all holy scriptures to be written for our learning, grant us so to hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that we may embrace and ever hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life, which you have given to us in our Savior Jesus Christ. He lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Amen. All right, so, okay, we mentioned well, I was mentioning the chapter before in 25, and then before that we had the other scene where David spares Saul's life. Anything else from the context worth thinking about? Perhaps, who is Abner, who actually sort of features a little bit more prominently in this chapter? Things like that.
Yeah, well, you do get a few characters here. I always try not to spill the beans and jump too far ahead, but you've got family connections here, right? You've got Abner, who's the general. I guess how I think of him, the general of Saul's army there, and he is given the primary responsibility of guarding over Saul. And we'll see today if he does that to his full capability and ability. Maybe he has a bit of a Garden of Gethsemane experience here. Feeling a little sleepy today. But then on David's side, I mean, he's got family around him too. Abishai is the guy who ends up spending a little extra time with him today, and he's David's nephew. Believe it or not, David's sister must have been a bit older than him, but you have Abishai, who's going to figure prominently. He's going to be maybe the chief of the 30 mighty men who do amazing things in battle, so you're going to hear about him. And then you also have Joab mentioned a bit too, who I kind of put him in the general role going forward. So you've got a few names here that they're going to show up, and they're going to keep on showing up next to their kings.
Yeah, well, and it's helpful to try to keep these names straight, because it can start really blurring together, and then you start getting some really kind of weird questions start coming to mind. For instance, like we didn't have a chance to talk about this too much, but for example, like in the previous chapter, in chapter 25, mentions at the end, David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel as a wife, and someone may have thought to themselves, now hang on a second, doesn't that name sound familiar? Of course, that's the name of Saul's wife. I guess I didn't even wasn't even aware of this, that some people speculated that there was that we have identity there. So it's there's a lot of questions sometimes of hang on a second, is this the same guy? Is this a different guy? Is that same name, right? Differentiations of place names. So it can be a bit confusing at times, but yeah, seeing that family connection with Abner and just recalling that to mind particularly, and then as you were saying also, some of the other characters on David's side, it's in some ways we haven't really had these sorts of kind of I don't know what, one family lining up on one side and one family lining up on the other, since maybe even chapter 17 with David and Goliath. There's a lot of ways in which this chapter kind of feels like it's following on the heels of that. But without introducing this to death, let's just go ahead and get into it here. Got 1 Samuel chapter 26 in the English Standard Version. Then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, "Is not David hiding himself on the hill of Hachilah, which is on the east of Jeshimon?" So Saul rose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph with 3,000 chosen men of Israel to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul encamped on the hill of Hachilah, which is beside the road on the east of Jeshimon. But David remained in the wilderness. When he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness, David sent out spies and learned that Saul had indeed come. Then David rose and came to the place where Saul had encamped. And David saw the place where Saul lay with Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of his army. Saul was lying within the encampment, while the army encamped around him. Then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite, and to Joab's brother Abishai the son of Zeruiah, "Who will go down with me into the camp to Saul?" And Abishai said, "I will go down with you." So David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there lay Saul sleeping within the encampment, with his spear stuck in the ground at his head. And Abner and the army lay around him. Then Abishai said to David, "God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Now, please let me pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear, and I will not strike him twice." But David said to Abishai, "Do not destroy him, For who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? And David said, As the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him, or his day will come to die, or he will go down into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. But take now the spear that is at his head and the jar of the water, and let's go. So David took the spear and the jar of water from Saul's head, and they went away. No man saw it or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them. Then David went over to the other side and stood far off on the top of the hill, with a great space between them. And David called to the army and to Abner the son of Ner, saying, Will you not answer, Abner? Then Abner answered, Who are you who calls to the king? And David said to Abner, Are you not a man? Who is like you in Israel? Why then have you not kept watch over your lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy the king your lord. This thing that you have done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die, because you have not kept watch over your lord, the Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is, and the jar of water that was at his head. Saul recognized David's voice and said, Is this your voice, my son David? And David said, It is my voice, my lord, O king. And he said, Why does my lord pursue after his servant? For what have I done? What evil is on my hands? Now therefore, let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If it is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is men, may they be cursed before the Lord. For they have driven me out this day, that I should have no share in the heritage of the Lord, saying, Go serve other gods. Now therefore, let not my blood fall to the earth away from the presence of the Lord, for the king of Israel has come out to seek a single flea, like one who hunts a partridge in the mountains. Then Saul said, I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do you harm, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Behold, I have acted foolishly, and have made a great mistake. And David answered and said, Here is the spear, O king. Let one of the young men come over and take it. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness, for the Lord gave you into my hand today, and I would not put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Behold, as your life was precious this day in my sight, so may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord, and may he deliver me out of all tribulation. Then Saul said to David, Blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things and will succeed in them. So David went his way, and Saul returned to his place. It's really interesting, I think, when you compare this story, not just to when David spared Saul's life in the cave, but then when you compare this, I feel like to the story of David and Goliath, there's, I think, some kind of strange similarities, or maybe unexpected similarities between that chapter and this one. Just like the idea of there being this valley or this big divide against them calling out to each other. At the end of chapter 17, David ended up with Goliath's sword, and here he winds up with Saul's spear, right? I don't know if those are the connections we're meant to be seeing, but I feel like there's something there as well. I don't know. What are the connections that are kind of popping out to you as you go over this?
Well, you always keep me on my toes. I'm never quite sure where you're going to connect. But I definitely see some you have there. That's for sure. I mean, I was spending quite a bit of time trying to figure out, okay, what is Scripture writer trying to bring out? What's the deeper layer here? This seems so similar to chapter 24. What is the deeper level there? Trying to figure that out. So that's where I was trying to focus my time.
And then we want to get to some of those deeper things. Like yesterday was really good when we were looking at Abigail, just thinking about all the Christological connections there. Just that idea of this is the one with whom the Father is well pleased, and things like this. but we'll try to look at first, kind of the connections just between the chapters that we have, and I think that those will hopefully then help us establish some of the things and the thoughts that you were having as you were kind of going further afield here. So we'll see if we can tie it all together. But we'll always start at the beginning since it's such a good place to start. So taking a look at the top, the first thing that happens, Saul gets this message from the Ziphites, and in case somebody's like, hang on, the Ziphites, this is yet another name. We remember that David has been hiding out in the wilderness of Ziph, right? So, I mean, these are the guys who have David in their backyard, and as we've kind of seen again and again, no one really cares to have David in their backyard. It's sort of a liability. So they go to Saul and say, hey, there he is. We found the guy. And Saul just comes down with 3,000 chosen men of Israel. And now that is like exactly the same. Why do you suppose that it just, I don't know, Saul just goes like right down there the same way with his three battalions of elite troops, like just without any hesitation, it seems.
Well, I'm trying to find the spot here. I was thinking somewhere it seemed to present the idea that in the background, a while here, that Saul was looking for David before this, and just kind of hoping to snoop him out. Now, maybe that was just an overview of kind of what's been happening here for a while, but I was kind of wondering, I wonder if that's kind of laying the ground of, Saul's, before what? He's now under an oath pretty much, right? He told David last time, okay, you were that close to me. I see what you've done. You've shown you could have killed me and you didn't, so, I'm not going to kill you. And obviously being the unstable guy that he is proving to be, he knows the word of God, and he's not able to follow through with it. And so I've been wondering how long has he been still back to pursuing David, kind of snooping around and trying to find out through his network. And then when the Ziphites come, who clearly are no friend of David here, whether it's something personal or whether it's allegiance to the king or like I forget the hot potato term, just want to get the hot potato out of their area that David is. They come up and I get the feeling Saul's been ready to kind of pounce back whenever David comes back on the radar. Or clearly he just kind of goes, maybe back and forth, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of human overtones here where, Saul and David, they have their days of, they're doing better walking on God's path, and they're the days that they they are not so well, which we saw, David before coming after Nabal there. So I wonder if Saul's just kind of been snooping around and waiting, and now the Ziphites have said, here he is, come get him.
Yeah, well, and it wouldn't be the first time, right? I mean, and this is sort of interesting, like as a similarity here. If you go back to chapter 23, so like the first time that Saul goes with this elite troop to go, and David ends up sparing his life. It says there in verse 19 of chapter 23, then the Ziphites went up to Saul at Gibeah, saying, "Is not David hiding among us in the strongholds at Horesh?" I mean, it's very similar. I mean, like in some ways, you start to wonder, like, hang on a second, like, is this the same thing here? It is slightly different language. Like the verb is a little bit different. David has shifted locations within the wilderness of Ziph. So you have, there's definitely some similarities like that. But also, I mean, this isn't even the first time that someone, or that wasn't even the first time, right, that someone had just kind of blown David's cover, because I'm trying to see where this was here. It was earlier than chapter 23, but it may have been with a situation with Keilah, if I recall here. Let me see here in chapter 23 here. Yeah, so So, I mean, you see there in the first part of the chapter, right, that after God tells him that the Keilites are going to surrender him, hand him over, right? It just says that Saul was told that David had escaped, right? So, I mean, like, people are telling Saul what's going on here. So this is at least like the third time it seems that someone is saying, like, hey, here he is, come and get him. So, I mean, it just keeps happening. But you're right. Like, why should this just happen again when they have a pact between them that they established at the end of chapter 23 that David was going to spare Saul's family, his house, his sons, right? And Saul was going to leave him alone.
I mean, this is really nothing new when somebody, isn't really focusing on the integrity that the Lord gives us. I mean, there are pacts and treaties that are signed all the time, and I'm thinking now of I know nothing too deep, but North Korea and South Korea were getting along for a while, and I mean, so it's really nothing new that after a while it's just kind of like, well, I know we said that before, but I'm not feeling it anymore, or things have changed, or there's always some. If you want to find some reason to do something, we usually can, and so Saul thinking, well, he's after my throne and everything I have. It's probably not too hard of him to think, well, I know I said that at the time, but look at what he's really doing. And I mean, I've got this kingdom in a good place, and there's no way he's going to be able to uphold what I have. It's just going to be, look what he's done to me. He might do that to other people. So, I mean, we can rationalize so many things. So, when Saul has had, spirits tormenting him, sent by God, and things like that, why, for him to change his mind to any extent seems pretty possible when you go through Saul.
Well, and I think that he's already broken a covenant, right? We saw that with Jonathan, right? Like when Jonathan, this was chapter 19, I think, that when Jonathan confronted his father after he had, said, like, hey, let's kill David, he speaks up on his behalf, and where is it? It's in chapter 19. Let not the king sin against his servant David. He goes on. And then, it says here that David listened to the voice of Jonathan. Saul swore, as the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. So, I mean, like, he's made promises before. And then it seems like, well, I mean, of course, then, after that, he's got the spear and he just throws it. This time the spear is going to be taken from him. But yeah, so in many ways, it's just kind of like, it just seems like this just keeps happening. And I think this is maybe why people, or part of the reason why people just say, oh, Saul is just, outright evil. Like, he never intended to keep any of these promises. He just says things. He never, but he's never really repenting. It was always insincere. But I guess this is kind of the question as we look at the beginning now of this chapter, right? Like, is this just Saul? I don't know what. Like, he never really meant it. Is this just Saul, like, he just can't help himself? Is the situation somehow different? I don't know. I mean, like, I get what you're saying about, just kind of like people say things, right? And then in the next moment we change. But what do you think's going on with Saul, though, in particular?
I mean, I think I remember you, taking a bit of a stance before and saying that, you thought Saul was repentant and basically meaning his words before. And I really take the same approach. I don't look at Saul as being just a big liar and trying to be all cunning and everything to get to David at all costs. I take him as I guess I see a lot of similarities, maybe to me, but I think a lot of people I have discussions with that we mean well, we have our days, and part of our shortcoming as sinners is in our times of weakness, we struggle to uphold what we say and what we do. I do the things I don't want to do, and I do the things that I don't do the things I want to do. It's confession for a lot of people every Sunday.
Yeah, well, I think I agree, and I think there's maybe a couple things more to look at in terms of what exactly were these oaths that Saul took. Might be helpful, but it's already time for our break here, so everybody hold on. We'll get back to 1 Samuel 23 in just a minute here on Thy Strong Word. Be right back.
On this Wednesday, October 7th, 2020, KFUO Radio thanks our day sponsors, Wayne and Elaine Muskoff of Belleville, Illinois, as they give thanks to the Lord for the blessing of marriage. Wayne and Elaine made a gift to KFUO in thanksgiving for the many blessings the Lord has bestowed on their family, and in honor of their 59th wedding anniversary, which they are celebrating today. Thank you, Wayne and Elaine Muskoff, for helping us share the gospel and for being today's KFUO day sponsors.
This has been quite a year, a lot of uncertainty. But there is one thing you can count on if you're a member of the Concordia plans. Your benefits through the Concordia plans are always with you to help keep you physically, emotionally, and financially healthy. Protect yourself and your family by signing up for your healthcare benefits, along with additional insurance and saving for retirement. Choose your 2021 benefits November 2nd through the 20th at concordiaplans.org/myaccount.
You hear our voices every day as we speak the gospel, share the latest news, or for insightful and sometimes entertaining talk. Why not share your voice with us and send us your feedback, suggestions, and questions? Leave your comment at 314-996-1542. Be sure to follow us on social media too, so you can like, comment, and share your favorite posts. Drop an email to kfuo@kfuo.org or send a snail mail letter to Worldwide KFUO, 1333 South Kirkwood Road, St. Louis, Missouri, 63122.
Welcome back, everybody, to Thy Strong Word. I'm Pastor A.J. Espinosa. We're looking at 1 Samuel chapter 23, joined by our guest today, Pastor Lucas Witt at Immanuel Lutheran Church in Baltimore, Maryland. If you've got any questions for us and you're listening live, questions or comments, give us a call, 1-800-730-2727. Or if you're in St. Louis, 314-821-0850. You can also send an email to kfuo@kfuo.org, or you can hop on the live stream, facebook.com/AJ Espinosa. Well, I want to talk about, so taunting. See, so the taunting is yet, I think, another connection between here and chapter 17, right? I mean, so I don't know, like how this seems to just kind of like be David and Goliath in some ways, like over again. This is just interesting. But so the question on Facebook, does the taunting of Abner hint of a past beef between David and Abner? That's an interesting question. And then the other question here is it a big deal that David takes Saul's spear? Usually we hear about a soldier's sword being their main weapon in ancient times. Saul seems to be a spear guy. I mean, he certainly likes to throw it around his court, it would seem. So that doesn't make you a spear guy, I guess. Nothing would. Yeah, those are some good questions. Turn to those in just a second. I want to thank our underwriters at the Lutheran Heritage Foundation. Thank you guys for your support of Thy Strong Word. Their website, lhfmissions.org. All right, so I wanted to turn back to the thing we were talking about, this like whole, is Saul like making these promises with his fingers crossed behind his back or something? All right, so let's just kind of briefly, review this here. So you've got a couple situations, right? So at least the first one that I recall is that Jonathan speaks to Saul in chapter 19, right? And there, he actually, it says here at the beginning, Saul spoke to his servants that they should kill David. So he like gives them orders. And we reviewed this here when Michal says, "Oh, he's sick," right? They're like, "Oh, but he's sick." So he's not telling, like, this isn't a secret hit that he's putting out on David, especially given like what we see again and again, where David's like, "What did I do?" It seems to be clear that Saul has put him up on charges of treason, and he wants him to stand trial. So in that instance here, it seems like Jonathan has convinced, because I don't know, this is interesting, I think. When Jonathan talks to him, and then he says, as the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. I mean that's pretty, when you think about it, that's actually kind of narrow. I mean, like that actually, in fact, might just mean, well, once we get the guy, right, he'll be punished, but not the death penalty. I mean, like, I mean, when you really kind of like look at it in terms of its context, like this could be kind of narrow. And then so similarly here, when you look at chapter 23, and the situation there where they have this, they make this pact at the end of, rather, this is 24, end of chapter 24. I'm trying to just get like the actual like words there, though. I mean, because it's I think to your point about human nature, isn't it always the case that we look back on our promises with kind of like extra scrutiny, like, well, what did I actually say? Like, was that language actually in the contract? So, you have swear to me, therefore, by the Lord, that you will not cut off my offspring. And so David, swears this, right? And before that, though, I mean, does Saul actually promise David anything? I mean, like you look over, so like, is this your voice, my son David? You're more righteous than I. You've declared this day, may the Lord, says, may the Lord reward you with good for what you've done to me this day. You shall surely be king, right? You look at it carefully here. He hasn't actually sworn anything. It says David swore, right? Not to, cut off his house. But Saul's just said, hey, like, I don't know, like live long and prosper, basically. And when you look at his words here today in 26, he's kind of saying the same thing. So, I mean, like, if I put that all together, like, I don't actually see a promise that Saul's breaking. I mean, assuming he's come out to capture him and bring him back to Gibeah to, like, stand trial for whatever these charges are.
Yeah, that's fair. At the end there, I guess I kind of, David swore this to Saul in 24, 22. So yeah, I guess I kind of made an assumption there as Saul went home at that point. But David is keeping his distance and actually went further away, I think, at that point. So why did David go away? Well, because Saul didn't actually agree to anything. He just turned around and left. But you make a good point. There's a lot of weaving in here from many chapters, and so what actually has Saul agreed to? That's a good question.
I'm reminded of I forget which guest it was. It might even actually been brought up more than once, but I think it was. Now I'm trying to remember if it was World War I or World War II. But it may have happened during both the World Wars. But there were moments where, when Christmas came around, there was just a ceasefire. And this is apparently something that's kind of happened like throughout the centuries. In fact, that for certain holidays, people would just actually like war stopped. It's like, no, we're not attacking them on Christmas Day, man. Like there was just like a certain level of, okay, but this is bigger than us. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to, the next day after go at each other, or perhaps like after the 12 days are over. I guess I don't know what the stipulation is on that. Like if it's Protestants and Catholics fighting, like what does that mean? So anyways, but, for that matter, I brought up earlier, like the scene in I think it was in the Odyssey. I guess it could have been the Iliad, actually, when I think about it, where the two men are fighting and they end up exchanging armor because they find out that they have some, brothers, cousins, twice removed connection thing going on. But it's like, okay, well, I won't kill you now, but hey, man, if I run into you again, I won't hesitate. So this kind of gesture of, okay, not today, right? Sign from God, something bigger going on. And we walk away, but that doesn't mean that I won't come after you tomorrow. is actually kind of common in the ancient world.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of an example. I know I've seen that before too, where you have two people you usually expect to fight, and they kind of walk off, and say not, not today, but next time, like you said. I remember you mentioned that before too. It always gives me a sense of things are a bit different when I think of the battle lines being drawn up. Today when I think of people going out to battle in wars, it seems a lot more distant and maybe covert, and I guess we just have bigger guns and bombs and such. But to think about how they would line up from each other across the valley and just kind of
exactly.
I was trying to picture what does it look like when Goliath comes out each day, and he's kind of like walking out and being like, listen to me talk a while, and nobody's thinking like go now.
Just shoot him now. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, just thinking of what the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, Civil War especially, right? Losses were massive because they just stood across from each other and had at it.
Yeah.
So how does that figure into communication? It's a totally different world to me, thinking about it that way, but it also helps think about this situation where people can, maybe stand across from each other and follow these, gentleman rules, and say like, well, not today.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think that's really helpful, the way that you just kind of painted that picture, just like as a different world, as you were saying. I think that's right, that we just, I don't know, I think as modern readers, we think to ourselves, Saul is such a mean guy. Why doesn't he just leave David alone? Hey, he was nice to him. He should just, call the whole thing off, And we're just not thinking about everything in like these ancient terms, right? Like Saul can't do that, I mean, just in his situation, kind of these competing warlords who have different obligations, right? Like, Ziph, that's under Saul's protection, if they come out to Saul and say, hey, this guy that you charged with treason's hiding in our backyard, he has to go after him, right? I mean, this is so here we are, right? So this is like how Commissioner Gordon, right, has to go after Batman when someone calls the police station, right? I mean, he finds some way to not actually arrest him in the end or something, right? But at least for the sake of appearances, he has to follow up on it. So I mean, there really is, I think, kind of a lot more obligation, and like you were saying, kind of gentleman rules and rules of patronage and all this stuff that are kind of going on that just make the situation very different. And I think that, Saul basically has to go out for David. Maybe it's not actually to kill him. Maybe it really is actually to try to capture him. So in any case, I don't think you have to read this as I don't know what, Saul is just being mean, or it's the same thing all over again. And in fact, I think one of the big differences, well, besides Abner, and we should think about that for a second in a moment here, but when David decides to go down to Saul's camp, he does not cut off a piece of Saul's robe or something like this. This is interesting, but he takes his spear and his water. This is different from the first time that David went down, all stealthy like. What are you making of this difference? Because I think this speaks to something.
Yeah, that's one. So I have a lot more questions left than I wanted coming on this morning. That's for sure. Because I mean, similar situation, right? He's going up there. He has the opportunity, and decide. Well, okay, peeking, a verse or two into the next chapter, it seems like David is still convinced that Saul's going to kill him. No matter what we think Saul's intent might be. But he's coming in there. He sneaks in. I love when the Bible does this, when you're thinking, I wonder if David is, sneaking in, Abishai, they're that sneaky and that good, or if God's helping them out, and then Scripture says, and God put them in a deep sleep. And you're like, oh, okay, I wondered about that.
Yeah.
But Abishai, he's a good warrior, right? I think somewhere in Scripture it says he killed 300 men with a spear in one day. And so, he's ready to do what he does best. He's a good warrior. So, When he's going to pin Saul to the ground, it's not, pin the tail on the donkey.
I love what he says, right? Let me pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear. I will not strike him twice. I mean, as if like to say, I'm going to do it in one. I will not have to use the spear a second time. One's going to do it. I mean, he's just saying, I've got this, David. It's going to be fast. I mean, he's ready to do his thing.
Right. He does it his way, when they say Hulk's a big guy, when they say Hulk smash, because that's what he does best. So you go to what your good weapons are. David, I can't help but think he's, especially with the spear in front of him, thinks, here's a spear that's been chucked at me a few times. So, I think when Pastor Martin yesterday kind of gave me a new perspective of how David could have said, I wasn't going to hurt Saul when I cut off the garment, but then in his despair that he seemed to have last chapter, he was kind of like, oh, I had the chance to do this. Next time I am, to get me out of this misery.
Yeah.
And then he sees that spear in front of him, and it's kind of like the original third episode of Star Wars when Luke Skywalker is kind of like defeating Darth Vader, his father, and suddenly he chops off his hand, and he looks at the chopped off hand that he just did to his father, and he looks at his hand that his father chopped off from him, is now mechanical, and he's kind of like, oh, I've gone too far.
That's right. Well, no, I think that's I think that's very much like what happened last time in chapter 24, where David realizes he's crossed a line, he's gone too far, even cutting off that part, like the hem of Saul's robe. And I think that this time it seems like he's actually learned a lesson, and he does not in any way, right? It says here, like in verse 9, who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? I mean, it just sounds a lot like what he learned in chapter 24 at the prompting of his conscience. A lot of what Abigail said, that David needs to be guiltless as a ruler because he stands for something more than just Judah or just his family, the family of Jesse, or anything like this. He stands ultimately for the Messiah. So in this way, he's like, I'm not going to touch him, right? Like, I'm not cutting off like the hem of his robe, like nothing on his person. So I think that in some ways, by taking the spear and by taking the water that's at his head, it's kind of like he drew like the chalk and on the sidewalk, the chalk in the street, like around him almost, as to say, like, I got this close, but I did not touch you. And so that seems to me like to be a little bit of the difference, right? Whereas like the first time, it's like, it seems like there is something that David feels guilty about. Like, okay, he cut off the hem, but like, was that just kind of part one before he cuts off? I mean, like you were just saying, right? Like Luke cuts off Vader's arm first to disarm him, and so that he can then kill him, right? So it's not the same thing at all, I think, as cutting off that part of the robe.
No, but I like what you said. That's probably the one biggest difference I noticed in all this is how last time David dared touch, maybe not him, but the garments, and he. You could say he's progressed, at least in the moment. But I like that. Yeah, I like the illustration, drawing the chalk. I'm not touching you, but there's the line. I didn't cross it. And
Well, okay. So there's the line, and I didn't cross it, right? So I think that's a really nice way of putting it here, because what does he say, right? So okay, so he goes then, takes his stuff. It says they went away. They go to the what is it here? They go over the other side and stood far off on top of the hill, right? Great space between them. This feels very much like David and Goliath, right? Where man, I just need to like actually find the thing from 1 Samuel 17, because I feel like that language is very similar, where it's like they're on two different sides and there's this great space between them. Let me see here. It was so back in chapter 17. Yep. So the Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. The language is insanely similar. Okay, is there anything that you're thinking about here, like with making these connections, this kind of line in the sand sort of thing with chapter 17 on one hand, and then what we have today in chapter 26?
I feel like you want to draw something out of me, AJ, and you're hoping I see what you see.
Well,
I really get that feeling.
I don't. I mean, like, I guess I'm not totally sure. Like, I don't think that a lot of people who read this like make that connection. But to me, it just feels like it's just kind of begging you to make the connection. I think especially with Abner, it's like Abner has not been mentioned more than once in passing since chapter 17. Right. In chapter 17, Abner's mentioned all the time. So you've got, what is it? As soon as Saul saw, it's my favorite tongue twister there. As soon as Saul saw David go out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I don't know. And so, Abner took him, brought him before Saul. So, I mean, like, Abner's like, a few times mentioned there in connection with identifying David. But then it's just like the only other mention of Abner has been like, what was it? It was like in chapter 20, it says like Abner was sitting at Saul's side. I mean, so I just feel like the way this is all being pieced together is just like, hey guys, it's chapter 17 again. Yeah,
what is it there? Verse 25, the Lord gave you into my hand today. That makes me think of, the Lord, I think he basically said the Lord will give you into my hand today. So,
yep.
I mean, I see, I don't know, kind of a different side of the same coin, I guess, where you have, David, who is, no matter the circumstances, or at least in these battle circumstances, he is being faithful to the Lord, and the Lord is on his side, and he's very sure of that, honestly. I mean, if there's one thing he's confident of, it's that God is on his side against Goliath and against Saul. But yet, in that situation, he's very willing to go against the one who resists God, and here he is very unwilling to go against the one who the Lord has anointed. But I feel like there's something deeper there that you're still wanting to dig out there.
I think we got to keep our shovels out, man. I think there's something. We're getting close, but okay. So look at what Abner says, right? So what's he say, right? Will you not answer, Abner? Then Abner said, "Who are you who calls to the king?" Okay, so this is interesting because not only is it Abner being mentioned here, but this is like the same. It's like the same conversation because Saul says, "Whose son is this youth?" And then Abner says, "As your soul lives, O king, I don't know." Right? So, and then the king said, "Inquires whose son the boy is." This is a parallel conversation, right? Abner does not answer. Like he like, this is what David's saying. It's like, will you not answer? Right? And who are you? This is what he's saying. Like, I don't know who this guy is. This is like what Abner said the exact same time. And then it ends up being that Saul has to be the one who's saying like, okay, well then, like, who is it? So it's a parallel conversation. As you said, David both times in chapter 17 and chapter 26 here says, God gave you into my hand. He says that to Goliath. He says that to Saul. I think then, I mean, it seems like you have all this stuff, and we should be seeing then Saul as, I mean, ultimately you draw this picture like Saul's Goliath, right? I mean, Saul has aligned himself as the enemy of God, and David, in fact, it sort of suggests it in a very modest way, right? But like, isn't it interesting that like what he says there? He says, "If the Lord stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering." I wonder what that means. Like, I feel like it's like may he accept an offering, for my guilt or something like this. Mm-hmm. But if it's men, may they be cursed before the Lord, for they have driven me out this day, that I should have no share in the heritage of the Lord, saying, "Go serve other gods." Like, I mean, isn't that interesting? Isn't David suggesting that this exile is tantamount to people forcing him to go worship like Dagon and the rest?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what he's saying there. If you're going to cut me off from, not just maybe the inheritance of my family by keeping me away, but even being around the kingdom and God's presence and His inheritance of the land. Yeah, I mean, to be in a place is really to be, connected to God's. That was a worldview they had back then. So, David does spend some time with the Philistines as well. So that makes this even more complicated. But yeah, to be elsewhere is to be we know God fills heaven and earth, but He's in a land where He is surrounded by. He's in the land of another god. In the worldview back then, that'd be Philistines is Dagon's land. So
right.
That's an interesting take. Saul as Goliath. I'm going to have to chew on that one there.
Well, I mean, at least is like maybe not necessarily as well. I guess in some ways, David himself isn't suggesting that, right? Like he is being polite because he's saying, if it is men, that is to say, if it's men who have stirred you up against me. So like, I feel like this is like in some ways David being like, well, really it's Abner. I mean, like, because isn't it interesting how he throws Abner under the bus? I mean, so this comes to the Facebook question, right? Is there some kind of beef between him and Abner, right? I don't know if there is. What I'm thinking actually is David is honestly trying to, like, in good faith, without impugning the honor of Saul, say, Saul, this like, you're bent on like coming after me. Right, it's not from God. So who, O king, right, the Lord's anointed, is putting this into your head? Not God. Is it Abner? Right? Is it Doeg? Right? Like, who's the traitor, right, who is, like, making you go after me? Because it's not God. I mean, like, I feel like when he says this and says, like, hey, the thing that you did, Abner, that's no good, you were going to let him die. Which is a huge contrast, right? Because in some ways, I think David's actually saying, I am more loyal to Saul than you are.
Yeah, yep. I was just thinking that by contrasting himself with Abner, I mean, the guy who's supposed to be most faithful to Saul and protecting him and everything. I mean, David is kind of showing that, guess what? Out of all these people around here, guess who is the most faithful to Saul? Guess who has shown that in the last, 24 hours plus? Me.
Exactly.
Even more than Abner.
So, I mean, I think it's an incredible rhetorical move here. And by doing this, right, I mean, like, I feel like this is actually like negotiation in very good faith to say, like, Saul, haven't I proven myself? Get rid of the traitor who's telling you all these bad things about me. Maybe it's Abner. Maybe it's Doeg. Like, I don't know, but, it's not God. In some ways, you almost think like if like the foul breath, right, that comes from Yahweh, it says, is that Abner, right? Like, who's whispering these things? You think of who is it? Is it Wormwood, who's like saying all those things, like in the Lord of the Rings series to the king Theoden, right? And well, anyways, before we get too many fantasy allusions into one thing. But, I mean, I think you just see this. It's an amazing picture here of David has just had this experience himself, right, where he has to be saved from himself. And I think he's trying to do the same thing now for Saul, right? Like, say, like, Saul, don't give in to that. That's not you. Be better than that because you stand for something bigger. You stand for the Messiah. You stand for the Christ. And, like, all these men are struggling in this way, too, to shine that light. So, well, I think we were on to something, and I think we got to keep pushing. Thank you so much, brother, for just kind of putting our heads together and looking at stuff the stuff today.
It's always fun, AJ. I'll keep my spade out.
Sounds good, brother. Everybody, Pastor Lucas Witt, Immanuel, Baltimore, Maryland, going on to chapter 27 here. Speaking of Philistines, till then, I'm Pastor H.S. Espinosa. Peace.
The official broadcast ministry of the LCMS. Your support is vital for this program to continue. You can make a gift safe, secure, and easily online at kfuo.org. Thank you for listening and supporting Thy Strong Word.